My name is Milla Räisänen. I'm working as a senior lecturer in university pedagogy at the Center for University Teaching and Learning and at the Faculty of Medicine. The theme of this video is aligned and continuous assessment for intended student learning and how to do it in practice. I have examined students' learning and studying and teachers' teaching practices as well as their well-being and also assessment from the students' and teachers' perspective with my colleagues. We have examined, for example, experiences of reliability and fairness of assessment. And at the moment, we examine students' experiences of grades and assessment without grades. Assessment of student learning is one of the most important aspects in teaching and also in pedagogical training. Based on research, we know that assessment strongly affects and guides student learning. When students begin studying in a course, one of the first aspects in which they pay attention to is how their learning will be assessed, and they focus on studying those aspects which will be assessed. Assessment practices have such a strong influence on learning that these form a hidden curriculum. This means that students can set their own goals based on assessment, not based on intended learning outcomes. It has been said that if you want to change student learning, change assessment. And this highlights what kind of influence assessment has on student learning. If we think about students' learning, it is important that students know from the beginning of the course how their learning will be assessed, and also that they are aware of assessment criteria which are used in assessment, and that assessment criteria are clear to them. Assessment has an important role in constructive alignment of teaching. In constructive alignment, it is important that learning objectives, contents, teaching and learning methods, as well as assessment, are in line with each other and support deep learning. The starting point for planning teaching is learning objectives. A teacher's task is to design assessment in such a way that it supports student learning and achieving the intended learning outcomes. Regarding alignment, it is important that students are able to have meaningful tasks through which they can practice those things they are expected to learn and what will be assessed. If we think, for example, about learning practical skills, for example in medicine and dentistry, it is important that students have a possibility to practice these skills during studying and get feedback about their own learning. Constructive alignment is a basis for high-quality teaching and learning. And it is important that assessment with all the other aspects of teaching enhance deep learning. Continuous assessment is important for students to deepen their knowledge and learning. And it would be important that students would get feedback in different phases of studying. There are different forms of assessment which a teacher can use in assessment. These are diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment. Summative assessment is maybe one of the most traditional ways to assess student learning. It is used in assessing student learning at the end of the learning process, for example by using an exam. Diagnostic assessment can be used at the beginning of the learning process, for example at the beginning of the course. Diagnostic assessment activates students' prior knowledge, skills and learning, and gives information to a teacher about the level of students' knowledge and learning, and helps to plan teaching. I think that the most important form of assessment is formative assessment, in which students' learning is assessed during the learning process and students get feedback from their own learning. These all can be used and combined in continuous assessment. Based on research, we know that in general, university students experience that they do not get enough feedback during studying, and that they would like to get more feedback about their own learning. It is important that students would get feedback, and also that the teachers are able to give feedback in such a way that their workload doesn't get too high. During teaching, a teacher can use activating teaching methods and activate students' knowledge, for example using group discussions or different kind of quizzes, and give feedback to students about their learning. A teacher can also give pre-assignments to students before teaching, which activates students' knowledge and learning. This can be done also with a large student group. A teacher can also, for example, give feedback to a whole student group about their tasks. One thing a teacher can also use is peer feedback and assessment, in which students give feedback to each other. Peer feedback promotes students' assessment skills, which are important. Then if we think, for example, about learning practical skills, for example, in medicine and dentistry, it is very important that students get continuous feedback, how their skills develop, and what they can already do at the moment, and how they can proceed in learning. In learning practical skills, it is important that students get feedback also regarding that their studies are just at the right level at the moment, and that they can now move forward. The feedback has an important role in supporting students' motivation and self-efficacy beliefs, which refer to their beliefs in how they are able to succeed in their studies and learn the things that are needed. When we think about learning, it is also important that the tasks which we give to students, that these are challenging enough but not too challenging. It is also important that the students are gently pushed to the so-called proximal level of development, which refers to something that they are not able to do by themselves yet, but they are able to do it with the support of others, for example, a teacher. And when students succeed in these kind of tasks and get feedback from it, it supports their self-efficacy beliefs. One thing that is important is that feedback is constructive, so that students get feedback about what are the strengths, but also ideas how to develop their own learning. And also, when students give feedback to each other, it is important that the teacher discusses with the students how to give constructive feedback. Regarding learning, it is also important that students experience psychological safety in their learning environment. And I think that one of the teacher's most important tasks is to create such a safe learning environment. It is also important that students learn to assess their own learning. Learning to assess one's own learning and regulate one's own learning is important during university studying as well as when working as an academic expert after graduation. Therefore, self-assessment also has a central role in assessment. All in all, if we think about assessment, different assessment methods can be combined in continuous assessment, and they can complement each other. Versatile assessment develops students' ability to assess their own knowledge and skills and to acknowledge gaps in one's own learning. And it also supports students to develop as academic experts who are willing to engage in continuous learning and are able to assess their own learning and skills during their whole careers. I encourage you to consider the role of assessment in your own teaching.